Humanities Center, but I'm so pleased to welcome you to this joint presentation. It's a collaboration among the Humanities Center, the Wayne State University Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, the Wayne State Department of Anthropology, and the Wayne State University Latina American Studies program. It's a wonderful collaboration, and I'm pleased to be part of it. It's a joint presentation between Indrani Paul Chowdhury and Eric Montgomery. And I have the pleasure of introducing Eric, and then he will take the floor to introduce his co-presenter. Eric Montgomery is a cultural anthropologist and assistant professor at Michigan State University and a faculty member in the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies here at Wayne State University. He is the co-author of the book Ethnography of a Voodoo Shrine in Southern Togo, which was published in 2017 by Brill, an editor and contributor to Shackled Sentiments, Memory and Slavery in the African Diaspora, published in this year by Roman and Littlefield. His forthcoming book, Global Voodoo in Haiti and West Africa, will be published by Indiana University Press. Eric is also the director and producer of two films, one entitled Chasing the Spirit and the other African Herdsman, both ethnographic films distributed worldwide by Artist Films in Australia. His current teaching load includes peace and conflict, peace and justice anthropology, anthropology of social movements, human trafficking, anthropology of Africa, science and technology and war, global health disparities, and anthropology of religion. His most recent publications can be found in the following publications: The Shaman, The Applied Anthropologist, Journal of Religion and Society, Journal of Africana Religions, Visual Anthropology, American Anthology, Museum Anthropology, Belt Magazine, and Journal of Ritual Studies. He's writing a new film with Professor Mwando Achebe of Michigan State University, and this film is to be directed and produced by Indrani Paul Chowdhury, who is his co-presenter today. So as you see, Eric is a very, very busy, very talented young academic, and I'm delighted that this is not his first Brumbath talk. He has involved himself in the Humanities Centers program before. Last year, for example, he gave a Brumbath talk entitled Ethnography of a Voodoo Shrine in Southern Togo of Spirits, Soul, and Sea. And he did this presentation with Christine Vanier. So that's my short, brief introduction of Eric, and I now turn the floor over to him to introduce his co-presenter.
Thank you. I want to premise by thanking you all for coming, and for Latino-Latina Studies, the Department of Anthropology, of which there's representation here, the Center for Peace and Conflict, and of course Walter and the Humanities Center for co-sponsoring this event. You know, labels are sort of for soup cans in this postmodern world, and Indrani really, I mean, I'm convinced she has 3 or 4 twin sisters, the amount of stuff she does. It's really impressive. In fact, Walter had come in after looking at her CV and said, I expected to find this older woman. I know she doesn't like to name drop, but I'm going to do a teeny bit of it anyway. She did Beyonce's first solo album career and helped launch that. She was discovered by David Bowie while studying. I don't even need to look at this, I know enough about it. She was discovered by David Bowie while at Princeton University, and actually his wife Iman for an exhibit she done. She shot with Lady Gaga and Britney Spears and Kim Kardashian. She's won 27 film awards. She's a photographer, but also a director, including 2 Gold Lions at Cannes for her work. As impressive as the people she's worked with in the photography industry is, the work she does for social justice is really unparalleled and extremely moving. She's done a film called Lady Whitesnake, which is an ancient Chinese legend where she takes 10,000 years of history and sort of condenses it into a, how long is it, 12 minutes?
Yeah.
Into a 12-minute film. She's done another one called Tell Human Voices Wake Us, which also won several awards, which is about the Selkies, and it's about environmental justice and the pollution that's going on in our waters as well. She's been at the Smithsonian, Vogue, I mean, it goes on and on. In fact, we could just do a whole hour reading through her CV if we wanted to do that. But the intriguing thing is we reached out and met each other about a little more than a year ago on LinkedIn, and she's extremely busy, but I pitched her this idea about Mami Wata. And the reason I pitched her this idea about Mami Wata is because I believe that there is a global South and an African Renaissance going on in this world. This is something that we've never seen before. We have people all around the world who are being initiated into Vodou and Orisha. There's actually more white folks, quote unquote white folks, being initiated in places like Haiti, around the world. Mami Wata probably goes back to Mama Isis as a whole, ancient Egyptian god, but water spirits were all around the world. But Mami Wata is almost always feminine. Wata actually, it comes from Tigrinya and Aramaic, so people say it's Pidgin English, but the truth is it precedes that as a whole. She was very excited about this storyline and story arc. I didn't feel like as a privileged male with my own ethnic background that I should be writing and telling the story. That's why I reached out to her, being half Indian and a woman of color. And I reached out to Wando Achebe, who's arguably the top historian in West Africa in the world. She is Chinua Achebe's daughter, who you may know from Things Fall Apart and Arrow God and all that. So Wando has been helping me write this script. She's been dealing with some personal crises as a whole, but her mind, the orality, and the way she processes images has been very exciting. So we've gotten quite a bit of interest in this. She has a lot of other projects that she's doing as a whole, but let's give a warm Detroit welcome. It's her first time in Detroit to Indrani. And then I'm just going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to her, because I think you all want to hear from her instead of me. So even though it's about framing Mami Wata, we're going to talk more about a lot of her work. So let's give her a warm welcome. So yeah, I'll go through a basic log line and short synopsis. So the idea for this film is to mix ethnographic film footage with what is called magical realism. A lot of that really hasn't been done. Maybe The Science of Sleep you see a little bit of as a whole. So these stories of Mami Wata, of Oshun, of Yemaya, of these different manifestations of African goddesses, they're all over in Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Congo. And oftentimes she's black, sometimes she can be white, so there's this element of racial justice and colorism that's embedded to this as a whole. The fact that she's tied to the water and to the ocean and what's going on with chemical stressors in our oceans and with water quality, it fits into the rubric of environmental justice. And of course, with women being very empowered, especially before the birth of Abrahamic religions, a lot of research is starting to show that women, even in lieu of Me Too, and we talk about empowerment, but that women around 2,500 years ago, at least in Northern Africa and the Middle East, may have been more empowered than they are today. Certainly financially, there's a lot of research on that. So the idea with crafting this thing of Mami Wata is to talk about gender, to talk about race, to talk about environment, and economic justice. Mami Wata is tied to money as a whole because she comes from the sea, cowrie shells come from the sea, so there's all these overlaps. And we were just talking in the car about just how all around the world there's these female water spirits that people have been fascinated with for a long time. So the idea is I can sit down and talk to academics. And by the way, her name, what I'm calling Mami Wata, changes. It's en français in Haiti, it's La Sirène, the siren. That's her name there. When you get into Orisha, which is Yoruba-based black gods, it can be Yemaya, who's the god of the ocean. It can be Oshun, or Ochun in Puerto Rico, it changes, who's the god of fresh water. So we're going to sort of base all of on the femininity that is water, and then also land. Land, female gods and earth goddesses around the world, or goddesses in general, tend to be female, because fruit and the vegetables we get tend to be female. So Dr. Achebe's idea is to play on this land and water sort of dyad back and forth as a way to empower women. Now the way the script will go is and we're not there yet with the script, it's going to take some work, but there will be white student, a Latina student or Indian student, and an African and an African American student who meet in Dr. Achebe's class at Michigan State. These 4 women will become friends, and one of them will become a doctor, one of them will become an attorney, very empowered positions. And then when the Flint water crisis breaks out, the pediatrician who knows her reaches out to the lawyer for a class action lawsuit. So with me being from Flint, and in lieu of this water crisis, and with this circulating around water, and with her just being really adamant about keeping social justice, you know, Indrani sort of believes that poets and writers used to carry a lot of weight, but and they still do. But in today's world of images, where images are so damn important and the visual is so important, that there's a certain responsibility for photographers and filmmakers to be doing things that are tied around social justice. So the script has not been worked out. That's a little bit of the framing of Mami Wata, and we'll hopefully have some time to take some questions as a whole. I'll just read the log line in the short synopsis, and then I'll turn it over to Indrani to show some of her past work, and we'll try to relate it to what we're doing here. So throughout the globe today, women, people of color, and Mother Nature herself are screaming for inclusivity and justice in a better world. 4 women learned to harness the power of Africa and unite a world divided by race, gender, and class. So racism, sexism, and environmental injustice are the core social issue topics of our time. In this film, these 4 women will spearhead a global call to action informed by the ancient organizing principles of Africa and various feminine African spirits of water and land. By igniting the African Renaissance, they lay out a roadmap for sustainable activism and to save a world ravaged by greed and hate. So this film conjoins themes of women and water, 2 of the most persecuted and important resources for life on Earth. It will commence in Michigan. These women, once they start to have these dreams and get involved, Mami Wata comes to them in dreams and things like that. With the African woman ends up bringing these women back to Africa. They get initiated in Nigeria and Ghana and Togo and Benin, and then there's a call for them to go to the new, quote-unquote, new world, to Brazil and to Cuba and to Haiti, and it becomes this social justice movement around Mami Wata, almost a religious sort of millenarial movement as a whole. Again, this isn't worked out. So core themes will be feminism, will be justice, and ideas of revolution. And I'm not going to get into the names of the women or what they look like or anything like that. I don't think there's time for that. So that's a basic sort of blueprint, roadmap for where we want to go with this film. So Indrani, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about whatever you want, but I was hoping maybe show some clips. Can we access some of those?
Sure,
Just double click on them.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me in Detroit. I think that someone's going to help this to come up on the screen miraculously. Technology is our greatest ally and also fails us sometimes. But so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the work I've done as someone who's studied anthropology and now works in film. I love to explore the mythologies that we have around the world and look for some of the similarities and some of what really informs these ancient traditions that is relevant to today. So one of the films I did was Legend of Lady Whitesnake, and it's a story of an ancient, it's one of the most ancient Chinese stories. It's existed for hundreds of years, and it's changed form throughout that time as the society evolves. So in the beginning, it was a story of a snake demoness, an evil demoness, who disguised herself as a human in order to marry this poor, innocent, unsuspecting good man. And a monk came along and saw her evilness and helped the man to realize that his wife was actually a demoness. And the story has transformed now to where, in the last 300 years, where the snake demoness is actually the heroine, and she's a tragic hero who cannot escape her past. And so even though she does everything to be this perfect woman, she's a healer, she helps to solve all the problems in her community, and she's this perfect wife, and yet the monk only can see her for her former self as the snake demoness. And the monk becomes the bad guy because he is trapped in his way of seeing things and unable to evolve and see the perfection in front of him. And so it's a really interesting story because of that transformation. Because we often think of stories and myths as being these static sort of creations that just get passed down, but we forget how much each retelling of the story really involves the individual who's retelling it and the society as a whole to whom they're telling it. So as their audience shifts, the storytellers have to shift their narrative as well. And one of the interesting things about that story and why it relates to Mami Wada is that she's a snake demoness, so she lives in the waters. And there's this historical tradition around the world of female deities that are centered in the waters and that may either have a snake or sort of a fish element. And in this particular tale, she's a 1,000-year-old snake, giant and terrifying. And part of the story of her return to her snake form is that there's a festival every year where everyone drinks a great deal of wine. And it's a special kind of wine that's designed to bring out the demons in society. And so it's sort of a purging process. And any demonic or former snake characteristics in the individuals is supposed to come out with this drinking of the wine. So it's an interesting story about transformation and about how much we can really change. And one of the defining characteristics of this story is that this former magical being, when she becomes a human in order to experience love, she gives up her immortality, she gives up her ability to control all the elements, but she retains the ability to heal and to transform others.
Yeah, the snake thing is universal. In fact, in Africa and wherever you have African diasporic religions, so I'm talking about candomblé and or macumba, which is a problematic word, but in Brazil, or where Walter's from, you have Winti. In Suriname and Guyana, you have these African spirits. There's always the serpent in the rainbow. Some of you who know about the master narrative to voodoo, for lack of a better term, is the serpent in the rainbow. But we see that in almost all Native American cultures. We see that in Aboriginal cultures with Nagas. In fact, they're so sacred in my village in Africa, when they find a dead python, they have a complete funeral, 7 days for it, just like they would the human being. So the personhood and identity of people overlaps with snakes. And when I've asked, what is it about snakes that make this? Well, snakes can go across all realms, right? They can go in the water, some of them. They can tunnel under the ground. They can climb up trees and go into it. So the snake symbol, and the thing is it's almost always tied to female femininity. So what's really interesting from Indrani's background, being originally from Calcutta and from Western India, is you go into these voodoo shrines in Haiti or these voodoo shrines in Africa, and you go into Mami Wada or Oshun Yemaya signs, they have chromolithographs of Manusa Devi, of Kali, anywhere where they see the snakes and they see the femininity. People say it's syncretism, they're mixed up, they're confused, but the truth is they're seeing similar symbols as a whole. So Hinduism is alive and well, even though it's not Hinduism in the traditional sense of the world, anywhere where you have these quote-unquote indigenous and aboriginal black religions in the world. Africans will even tell me, Hindus have the strongest witchcraft in the world, Aze Ama Homo, because they see a lot of Indians who are doing pretty well economically. They fit they're meditative. I'm buying into stereotypes here, but for the sake of the way they're seen. So there's an enormous amount of respect, not just for snakes and for femininity, but for Indian gods in general. And sometimes they'll even say, of course those gods are blue, those Hindu gods are blue, because black people, when we get really dark, we take on a bluish hue. So there's these weird ways of looking at it. Should we talk about Till Human Voices Wake Us? Do you have it?
Yeah.
Can I bring up an image there? Or should I just bring up Beyonce and Kanye? Is that what everyone else wants to do about? Just double click and I'll drag it for you. You can give sort of a backdrop of this one.
Okay, well this is from Legend of Lady Whitesnake. So part of the story is this battle between the bird creatures and the snake creatures. So the air, which represents sort of the higher part of one's nature supposedly, and the
A little louder,
underworld.
please.
Oh, yeah.
You need to face the audience. If you moved around, you could probably hear a lot better around the table
You want
than
to
when
get
you're
up and talk
facing
now?
this way.
I'll
Yeah, you
go.
can circle through this. Okay. So in some of these stories, there are there are a lot of creatures, animal representations of various parts of the human being. And the bird creatures tend to represent often the higher faculties, the ability to fly, the ability to transcend space and time, whereas the snake creatures often represent going deep within and bringing up your kundalini energy. So in India and in the Eastern countries, you have this concept of the snake that forms the basis of the body, and the snake energy that rises up through the chakras. So a lot of this imagery has to do with reconciling one's past, reconciling one's ability to gather the base forces, so all the desires that otherwise, when unchecked, can take over a person, and focusing them towards higher states of excellence and community as well. So it's an interesting set of symbols that we find globally. And one of the other projects that I worked on is called Till Human Voices Wake Us, and that's actually about selkies. In the Celtic countries, there is a very similar tradition of water creatures, typically female creatures that are seals in water and turn into humans on land. So they have the same transformative aspect and the same water representing the subconscious and the unknown parts of the being, the memories and parts that are harder to access. And these selkies, when they come on land, anyone who sees them falls in love with them. So they have this sort of love goddess aspect, which is also reminiscent of Venus and the Greek and Roman ideas of this beautiful woman that comes out of the water and seduces everyone. So these are ideas that if you look deep enough in just about every culture, there is some kind of water snake, feminine, seductress, controller of the unconscious that takes different forms. In the Celtic stories, one of the interesting aspects is that doing some research, I found that there actually was a historical reason for some of these myths. So the seals that turn into women may actually have been Inuit women that were traveling in skin-based canoes or kayaks. And so for people of the Viking types of ships, which are wooden-based, they found this extremely odd that women could just be in this tiny little boat made out of skins, and they would actually come on land and dry the skins out, because after you've traveled in the water for a long time, the skins get waterlogged. So this myth of women coming on land, doing a dance around a fire, and then escaping back into the ocean may actually have had a very real reason for that story.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Mami Wata, one of the main stories with Mami Wata is she's very vain, right? And like I said, she's tied to money. So when you go to a Mami Wata shrine, most voodoo shrines, like the Goro Voodoo I do research on, some gods they sacrifice dogs to, sometimes it's cats, often a lot of goats, a lot of fowl as a whole. But with Mami Wata, there doesn't tend to be any blood and animal sacrifices, which is a reprieve from my Western-centric person. I can't tell you how many, even though I'm an anthropologist and I'm supposed to let things go, I can't tell you how many dogs and cats I've freed, economically freed. It's actually an issue. But the thing with Mami Wata that is so intriguing is these same things she's talking about with the Selkies and with the Emmas and stuff like that. You do see these, and of course Joseph Campbell was famous for this comparative mythology stuff, right? And anthropologists got really into particularism and sort of shunned that. But there's something to it, because Mami Wata, the way she's seen in Africa, is you'll be walking along the beach and you'll see this beautiful woman, normally medium to light-skinned black woman, oftentimes with green eyes. She's decked out in diamonds and gold. She has a mermaid tail, and she's there looking at herself in the mirror, and she's combing her hair, and she has all these baubles and stuff, and then she'll see the human being that will see her, and this happens everywhere, all the way from Congo to Malawi to Brazil. You see these same sort of storylines. So I'm walking along the beach, I see Mami Wata, she jumps into the sea. And when she jumps into the sea, she leaves her mirror, she leaves her comb, she leaves her jewelry and her goods. I take them home. She wants her stuff back, so she starts haunting me in dreams. And she says in dreams, look, you give me back my stuff and you marry me. And she expects you to be, even if you're a married man, you have to be faithful to her. which means you're not sleeping with your wife anymore if you would really adhere to it. And if you do that, and it depends, in Cuba it's 4 years, 3 years, in West Africa sometimes 7 years, the amount of people who become really wealthy and rich is a big deal, right? So these things become God objects, these different things. So when you go to the Mami Wata shrine, it's like going to grandma's house. There's candles, there's perfume, they pour out champagne, they pour out soda pop, there's all these beautiful cakes and sweet things. And then of course there's pictures of her with the snake like you see here. So that actually that's actually a Samoan snake goddess that the Germans brought to Togo and to Central Africa and to Tanzania in the late 1800s. And from that chromolithograph, that is the way they see Mami Wata, even though that's a Samoan god. And it's because they see the black woman, they see the very African hair, they see the snake. So you'll see that picture, so it's spread all over as a whole.
And going back to the Celtic story, it's very similar. The Selkies come on land, they dance around the fire while their skins dry out, and if you want to get a Selkie wife, you steal the skin and you don't let her get it back. And so then they become these wonderful wives for as long as you have the skin. And as soon as they find their skin, they're gone. It doesn't matter how many children they have or what kind of family you've managed to build. So they're similarly these water-based beings that are ready to leave at any moment.
I bring up this picture of Beyonce, and I know she comes from a Christian background, so I don't know how much I should say about this as a whole. I don't know how much of you have seen her formation or any of Beyonce's concerts the last 2 or 3 years, but it is definitely informed by Mami Wata. In fact, she would be Mami Wata because she's so beautiful, right? As a whole. My gut tells me, and based on some people I've talked to, and I don't want to just infer this, but that her and Jay-Z both are very interested in African religion. I don't know how much they've gone through. I've heard some things that maybe they've been initiated. She's probably not going to speak to that. I probably shouldn't speak to it.
I can speak to it actually.
Okay, would you? Good, because you know more than me.
Well, so this image was her first solo album debut that I photographed. And this was actually created very much without her involvement. So she came to me and she said, I want to do something universal. I want to do something with elements of the universe. And that was the brief that I got. And so we spent the day doing all kinds of interesting things. And this image actually was the result of a lot of accidents that happened. There was a piece of a circus outfit. This top was sort of a very strange looking thing. And she ended up borrowing one of the crew's jeans because she had only these long dresses. So it was a process of just trial and error. But it turns out, and I should have brought with me, if you've seen the Nataraj, it's an Indian statue, very, very famous one, of Shiva, and Shiva's doing this dance that's a universal dance of life and death.
Yes.
And this image actually lines up exactly with that. And that goes back to my origins from India, because I grew up with a deep love of Indian symbology and Indian gods and goddesses. And so it's interesting how the unconscious impulses that we bring as artists to our work end up coming out in ways that line up really, really well. It was certainly not a planned situation. So I think Beyonce has really evolved from being someone who let everyone else express who she is to someone who's really taking charge of her image and the stories that she conveys through her art.
Yeah, I showed this one here, and I say the initiated with Oshun because of what I read, but formation, she's finding her agency even in this image, but she's successively, what I wrote here is she successfully managed through the subversive realm of desire to empower herself to an almost godlike level of control, both of her image and of her life. Formation is simultaneously a celebration and a protest. So Van Strippian, who's one of the foremost experts on Mami Wata, has taken these images and at her concert and said, this is most certainly Mami Wata. I don't know how much she has spoke on this, and I don't want to get into why she hasn't spoke on this, but I think a lot of it has to do with, because here's the thing, even if she's initiated into Mami Wata and interested in voodoo as a whole, it doesn't mean she has to throw her Christianity aside. That's something that we tend to look at as a whole. For example, when you go into the Mami Wata shrine, you'll see things to Jesus Christ in 3 different versions. You'll also see in the Mami Wata shrine the Dattatreya, the triple-headed from Hinduism that you see as a whole. So people say syncretize, which comes from Greek. It means synkrasis. It means to mix up. People assume that they're mixed up, but they're not mixed up at all. Because when slaves were brought to the New World, they were not allowed to worship Mami Wata and these other spirits. So they kept them alive by, my dissertation was called Converting the Converter, because people were in chains, literally shackled when they were, and given holy water, right, to be baptized, especially in the Spanish throughout the world. But what black folks were able to do, and people of African descent were able to do, is they were able to maintain these traditions by you thinking that they're Christian. So, for example, in Haiti, they say Haiti is 100% voodoo and it's 80% Catholic. So I don't want to say the African mind, because that sounds horrible, but there's a certain orality and there's a certain way of seeing and a way of being in the world for people of African descent that does not fit our Western frames. Let me just say that as a whole. They're very inclusive. So they'll say to me, yes, Jesus existed. Jesus died a violent death. He was murdered. Of course we believe in Jesus. Now, they don't believe he's this bearded Near Eastern God who created the world, but they certainly believe that he existed. They certainly believe in his benevolence as a whole. But I think she's played with quite a few of these, quite a few of these as a whole. So that's Isis from the Egyptian realm there. As a whole, can we? Would you speak to a little bit about Tell Human Voices Wakeness? Should I bring up while you're talking? Can I try to bring up a clip?
Yeah. If you can get into the video, then you can.
Is it on YouTube too, or just video?
Just video. But I opened it up here. Thanks.
Could I ask a question
Yeah.
while he's doing that? The notion that this is feminist, in some sense, is interesting to me, because the descriptions you're giving of seductress, alluring kinds of images would indicate to me that much of this mythology and belief system is designed by men. Would you say that's true or not around the world in that sense, that men wrote this stuff, or that women can now take pride in some sense of writing this?
I think that mythologies, by their very nature, tend to be created by both men and women. I don't think that it's necessarily one or the other. I think the oral histories and oral stories that are passed down tend to be passed down across the board. So in a way, it's co-created, and these stories evolve depending on the cultures that they're moving through. The details change. Some of the core aspects stay the same, but over time, even those can evolve. So I don't know if one could say if it's really a male-dominated or female-dominated perspective, but it's certainly an empowered female character that is able to control the world around her in various ways. And seduction is certainly one of them, but not the only one.
Wanda would say that yes, that men, and I'm speaking for her based on the same conversation, that the whole idea, so it's interesting, women go into trance a lot more than men. About 70 to 80% of the people in the village who are married to a spirit, who go into trance, who become possessed by a spirit, are female. And a lot of people have written it, well, because women are disempowered and they're marginalized, it's a way for them to invoke power as a whole. Nwando tends to look at it as a dualism thing, kind of like what you were saying, a co-created. There's this constant way of balancing. But the men storytellers, the infamous griots from Africa, patriarchy rears its head everywhere, right? But I can tell you this, when it comes to Mamiwata and sitting down and knowing the history and the story of this, the women do harness an enormous amount of power in here. Even though there are Papiwatas and there are men Mamiwata priests. Now, the men Mamiwata priests tend to be very, and I don't want to objectify people, but I can almost tell who goes into trance or what their priest is, even without any of the symbols, just based on their character. They tend to be very good-looking people, both the males and the females. They almost come off to me with my Western thing. I used to think, oh, well, maybe he's bisexual or maybe he's gay, and then I realized, no, that's my own distortions from my own culture. These are people with many kids who are not bisexual at all, but they fit those stereotypes in my mind of being feminine. Maybe they speak with a lisp, or their nails are really well groomed, or sometimes they put on makeup. But none of this stuff translates into Africa. There's men who act like women. There's women who act like women. There's women who act like men, right? So you're already up to 4 genders. There's been a lot of talk of the Burdash, but it's fluid. I mean, we're doing LGBTQ here. They've been doing that in sub-Saharan Africa and in India for 3,000 years. We're the ones that are caught up on these gender things. A lot of indigenous people around the world have always known that some men act like women, and it doesn't have anything to do with sexuality or gender as a whole. But the stories have been, like she said, co-created, but there's almost a way through some of these specific things for women to harness a power that they might not otherwise be able to obtain. So the answer is sort of yes and no. But that would be a good question. I wish Dr. Achebe was here. Dr. Saperstein.
I was just going to say that in the Western world, power is created, or is obtained by women through seduction, by men by the sword. That's the Western world. The interesting thing is, if you go beyond the Western world, you find women with swords.
Yes.
You don't find that in what I call our Greek heritage. But in the Slavic heritage and the Northern European heritage, you even today you currently find graves of women warriors.
Absolutely. In India, certainly, a goddess that I love, Durga, she has 1,000 arms and she has every kind of weapon in each hand. So, including the pen and including a conch shell, which is symbolic of public speaking.
And what's fascinating to me is that the image of male power is derived from our classical Greek heritage, or seems to be.
Although I will say this, what the Greeks took was and the Romans took from the Greeks, and it's not a unilinear line, but it was extremely, extremely influenced by Egypt. We talk about Greek, for every single Greek god, and now they're starting to break down hieroglyphs. There's some exciting things going on in anthropology, where they're starting to break down hieroglyphs and things that don't fit a Cyrillic or a Western alphabet. And from the hieroglyphs, they're starting to see the root words of things that later got brought into Greek. Because there was so much exchange and things going on. Now the truth is it wasn't like a unilinear line from Egypt. Egypt had people from what today would be Middle East, from Sub-Saharan Africa. So people were always mixing as a whole.
From India as well.
Yeah,
Some
India is-
Indian deities show up in the Egyptian pantheon.
Exactly, and there's a lot of talking. A lot of it is problematic because it's, when you don't have a history, or your history's been stolen for you the way it has been from black and brown people, but especially people of African descent, there's this siren call to reclaim history and say, look, Europeans were living in caves when Egypt was booming, when Zimbabwe or Mali or Ghana was booming. And it's important. I talk a lot about this because I think black kids need to realize that and know that. But a lot of the Afrocentric stuff, I have some issues with. Some of the science on it isn't good, but there is no doubt we have underrated what the African influence and what they've had on the rest of the world for eons. And I'm hoping this film can sort of speak to that. Do you want to set this up and I'll play it? Just a frame. Is this what you want me to play?
No. Another interesting aspect on the power dynamic is that a lot of these cultural stories of powerful women don't necessarily reflect women's power within that society. So while in India you have goddesses with 1,000 arms having all these weapons, in society, the society that worships that image, women can be completely subjugated. So there's often a lack of a correlation between the sort of spiritual ideal and what's actually happening.
I think she wants to show it. Where is it?
I'm trying to go to the video.
Isn't it that?
But it's a different video. Another aspect to all of this that's interesting is how these stories get retold in the modern age, which for the most part, a lot of these stories either turn into children's stories or they get turned into cartoons. There's sort of this simplification of stories that have quite complex bases. For example, Legend of Lady Whitesnake, there are tons of different TV series, films, even a sort of soap opera version of it that have been created in Asia. And the story is different in each part of Asia. So China has a huge affinity for it, but in Vietnam it looks very different. But the complexities of the original versions tend to get lost in many of those sort of dumbing down. So I love to go back to the source material, and it's really quite surprising the degree of agency that these female characters have in those tales.
I think we got it. You can bring it to both sides. That's it, right?
That's the voices usually.
Yeah, because of the selkies and all that. I don't know how well the volume will be on this, but this is a 3-minute. This is still Human Voices Wake Up.
It's going to be sound from the laptop, looks like.
It's all right. The images are more important. It's okay.
was a very short version of it, instead of a trailer.
You want to talk a little bit about the casting and maybe just a teeny bit about the climate, the environmental justice issue, where you were going with that?
Yeah, it was really interesting to look at environmental issues from the perspective of mythological creatures, and bringing them to a Manhattan setting was a way to address some of the magic of the oceans and some of the what they represent in our imaginations as well. That when we talk about the destruction of life in the oceans, it's not just the specific fish or the specific life forms that we know of, but all the possibilities that exist in that sphere, and looking at it from the perspective of, you know, what would the sea creatures say if they were able to come and storm Manhattan and share their thoughts with us. You know, how would that, how might that look? That was part of what motivated the creation of this film. And Lindsay Lohan is in it, as well as many other young, undiscovered talents. And it's based on the actual version, which we didn't show you here. The core of the story is a T.S. Eliot poem, which is the Proof Rock poem, comes to life in this story. And so it deals a lot with the ideas of memory and longing for the other that you might not actually know what that other is, and the way in which that other can be non-human or be part of a different ecosystem.
Can we do, and I think I can find it, just because I know this is kind of about Mami Wata, but just to keep with the justice angle here. So she won the CNN Expose Award, that's right, 2018, and then you won a Disruptor Award from Tribeca this year, right?
Yeah.
For what was the best public service announcement. So when we go to Michigan State in an hour or two, I have all my students in peace and justice and in social movements class creating public service announcements. There's issues like mass incarceration, like climate change, like LGBTQ equality, you name it, mental health. They're working on all these social justice issues. So I've had them put together a public service announcement and write their own script and then record it. So she's going to come and do a workshop at Michigan State on that and give feedback. But hers, and can I say that it's, I think I can say this right with the feature, so it's grown into.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and where do I find it, and I'll bring it up while you're doing it.
It's called Girl Epidemic. It should be in there.
All right, I'll look for that, and you
Okay.
can talk about it.
So this is called Girl Epidemic. It is a very short piece, and it's about trafficking, the epidemic of trafficking and disenfranchisement and of girls around the world. And this was created when we came across the statistic that millions of girls are missing in Asia. And they're missing for a combination of reasons. It's not just trafficking, it's child labor and female infanticide that have caused a massive unbalance in the numbers of girls and women in Asian society, in particular in India and China. But these are trends that are seen around the world. And this massive industry of sex trafficking really exists because there is a tacit agreement between police and politicians that prevents the traffickers from being brought down. They're very often the people who utilize the trafficked victims are parts of the society or are people of power in the various countries. So part of the nonprofits that I've worked with who try to dismantle these networks of trafficking find a lot of resistance at many different levels. So really the solution to help stop this epidemic is to create awareness amongst ordinary people who can then go and activate their politicians and show that they have a great interest in solving this issue. So what we did, because you don't get to see girls getting kidnapped very often, it's something that happens in complex ways, whether families sell their children or whether they're girls that go into labor situations.
Forced marriage,
Yeah,
infanticide.
Yeah, so many of these are invisible problems that what we decided to do is to make them visible in a metaphorical way. So this is actually it's
taking a real situation but creating a scripted sort of horror version of it.
And this was shot in Mumbai, right?
Yes, it was.
And she did get some pushback from people when she aired this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, everyone wants to believe that problems happen elsewhere. So in India, I've talked to all kinds of intelligent, educated people, from judges to professors, who will say, "Oh, that doesn't happen here. That's something that happens in America, or it happens in the Middle East, or somewhere
But
else."
$1 million a year is what the UN estimated that, if you take into account infanticide and stuff. So
Actually, quite a bit more than that.
maybe even more than $1 million. So 40 million slaves in the world today. If you take 400 years of the transatlantic diaspora, depending on the numbers, of course, this does not count the Africans who died necessarily on the voyage over, or those who died in Africa, but 10 to 12 million. Think about that. So there's 4 times more slaves in the world today than there was the total transatlantic slave trade. More than half of those, about 65% of those, are sex trafficked. Half of those are girls under the age of 17. So we have as many girls 16 or younger who are slaves today in the world as we do total people who were brought from Africa to the New World under chattel slavery. So I'll show this. And this is called the girl epidemic. So we got about 10 minutes left. What I think we'll transition to that you would all like to hear about is, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and here, and she said, Indrani says, yeah, it's 2 different worlds. We have this vanity and this publicity. Some would say publicity is a substitute for democracy, right? A lot of Marxist people would say that. So you're doing L'Oreal and you're doing Versace or Barney's and all this, but yet here you are in Central African Republic passing out mosquito nets, I think is what you said. So would you talk a little bit, just to everyone, and loudly so everyone can hear too, a little bit about just balancing that? I mean, this quote-unquote world of hyper-imaging and all of this, and you have all these corporate clients, and you've done this with all these famous people, but yet you found this way to go and make change in the world. How do you balance, how do you do that? And why aren't more people doing that?
Well, those are tough questions, but I think imagery is power, and I've come to realize just how much an image can influence people. First of all, it's something that an iconic image stays with someone, it can stay with them for life, and it's very hard for words to do that. There are certainly phrases and poems and things that people remember their whole lives, but those are few and far between. Images have a very powerful effect, and when I came to realize that was actually when I was a kid. I just left India, and as an immigrant child, I was far away from everyone that I loved, and the only thing I had were these photos that I could hold on to, that I could look and see that this past that I imagined was real. And so I recognized, for me personally, the power of images at that time. And I started a school in India. When I went back to India as a teenager, I realized how fortunate I'd been, and that with very little money and resources, you can actually do a lot. But then I got into photography professionally, and I became really successful. I shot with David Bowie and Beyonce and all these wonderful people. And quickly I found that I could fund my work and my school with doing advertising. And through that process, I really came to recognize the power of constructing images to change people. And of course, in advertising, you do that to make people buy things they don't need, to make people believe in an image of perfection that is unattainable. And I became very frustrated with recognizing that I was being part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So the power of celebrity is something that I was able to access through that work. And I also came to recognize that a lot of people who are very famous for their art or for their image want to also have meaning, just like all of us. We all want to know that what we're doing makes the world better rather than worse. And so I was able to bring them into the nonprofit projects that I wanted to do, and convince them to do things like lie in a coffin to fight AIDS in Africa. And
That was the digital death one?
yeah, so I'd love to show you, which is, Kim Kardashian. Oh, that's not that. So that's an advertising
That's not the
version.
coffin one. That's an advertisement, huh?
Yeah. Oh, this one up here.
Kim K is dead.
Yes. So this was a campaign where I brought 30 different celebrities and put them in coffins to help raise awareness of people dying in Africa and India of AIDS, and to raise funds. So we raised $1 million in less than a week, because the challenge of something like AIDS in Africa is most people say, well, I can't relate to these people. They're people I don't know. They're people that are so different from me. Why should I worry about them? Why should I put my money to saving them? And so the point of this campaign was, well, you don't know Kim Kardashian either, but you certainly care a lot if you see her in a coffin, and you think you know her. So, if you're going to care about people you don't know, why not care about people that you can actually help? And an interesting part of this campaign was also leveraging the social media of the celebrities. So they all agreed to be dead until we'd raised $1 million. So on social media, they went quiet. They did a last tweet and testament so that their followers would know what was happening. And so their fans, who are addicted to this personal communication that they believe that they have with these individuals, had to buy back their lives. So it's sort of extortion. So even people who didn't care about AIDS, or people in Africa, and they really cared about hearing what Kim Kardashian's lipstick was that day, would put their money to helping people. And so it was a fun way to sort of explore the relationships people have with celebrity as well as with doing good in the world.
So Indrani, for those of you who don't know, Indrani was an international model from like age 14, is that right? You wanted to be on the other side of it, and they said, no, you sit down and take pictures. But by the time you were 18 or 19, you had made a lot of money, and you went back. She was brought up from a Zamindar family in Bengal area of eastern India, and it was a huge, 300 room house, but it was dilapidated, it was ramshackle, and she took her money from modeling at age 18 or 19, and she started school called Shakti Empowerment Education, the C School. And for, I don't know how long, I won't get into your age, but for a long time now, there's 300 kids. And these are kids, mostly rural kids, who don't have a chance, that end up in the factory, that end up in the fields. And even, I know her and her dad sometimes have to go around and convince people to at least let one kid go to school.
Yeah,
and then those kids go back and teach the family. There's a homeopathic thing. I know you provide breakfast, but she's been doing that. So that, to me, I mean, as impressive as this is impressive stuff, right? Famous people are impressive. To me, that's what really makes her a remarkable human being and a remarkable woman, is doing that. So, anything? You want to take some questions?
Well, just adding one thing to that point is that I came to realize that it takes a lot of work to run a school in India. And it doesn't take very much to do a celebrity campaign. It takes, I spent maybe 10, 15 days on this project. But the impact is so much greater of what you can do when you leverage your skills. So a lot of people want to go and do good, and they want to go away from the things that they know. But I always encourage everyone to look at what they can do in their lives today, the skills that they have, the relationships they have, that can actually impact for good the world around them.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah,
What was it?
What is the meaning of money in the Mamawani belief? I don't think it's commercialized. I mean, it seems like there's a form of fertility.
Yeah, it's weird because money, with the African, with the way things work in African mindset is, he or she here, especially in America, right? You could be dressed like, not very well and be a millionaire or whatever, but he or she who dies with the most, it's like this idea, don't tax millionaires, they earned it, we shouldn't be penalized for being them rich. But in Africa, it isn't how much you have and how much you accumulate, it's how much you redistribute and how much you give away. And in order to redistribute and get away, so there's this weird tie with Mami Wada and prayers for her to get money, but if you take that money and you don't share it and you're not taking care of things, she'll take that money right back. In fact, people will end up, so there's this weird thing. There's an interesting thing that a lot of dead bodies were brought, and African voodoo priests will talk to me about this. They would put dead bodies on chains underneath the water, and then they would get filled with cowries, right? Cowrie shells were money. So they would actually trade cowrie shells for slaves. In fact, a bag of cowrie shells was the equivalent of one slave. So there's all these weird overlaps with money and the way things are monetized there as a whole. But people who tend to be successful coming from a lot of these poor villages almost always have a Mami Wada shrine. And those who stay successful and have people that visit them for healing and donate money to the shrine damn well better be giving it away. And the ones who become misers don't tend to last so long. So this is a way, it's a social strain gauge. It's a way to equalize things. But that's a good question.
One other question is, why is the devil in the Christian religion a snake?
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to the original sin in the Old Testament of the snake. I think that narrative has a really big part and a really big thing to do with it. You know, I mean, remember it was the snake that tempted Eve, right? I mean, so I don't know.
It just seems like the opposite meaning of the snake in the rest of the world.
That's right, and they would turn Legba. When you hear these old Black Blues songs talking about the crossroads are Legba. Legba is the trickster guy. He's the seventh born. He's the youngest. He's a Legua in Puerto Rico. His name changes or whatever, but he's got the big penis that's so large he can throw it over his shoulder, right? This big phallic penis and stuff like that. But they equated him, when I say they, I mean Westerners and stuff, with the devil, and they would say he's the devil as a whole. Well, he wasn't a devil. But I don't know. Andrade, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's been a fundamental clash between the female-centric religions and paths, which all of these female water goddesses, snake goddesses tend to be of that tradition, and the patriarchal religions have very deliberately taken that imagery and inverted it and utilized the power that people believed in that kind of symbolism and turned it into a negative thing to try to break the relationships people had previously with earth-based and nature-based religions. So
yeah, it's just interesting that the argument as it goes, in the Christian religion, the devil, the snake, is a male.
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to do the full inversion, then the snake would be female, convincing Eve to seduce the male.
well,
The
and
misogyny runs so deep that they've even co-opted the symbols. Go ahead.
and also these are the symbols that culture attaches. In the Bible it doesn't say the snake necessarily is male or
Yes,
female.
it's getting translated later.
Yeah, so these are things that we attach to the word that's there, that we embellish it based on our current beliefs.
I'll take a question, but before I forget, Devankar, will you just take 2 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Because I didn't do that before. Go ahead.
Hi everybody, my name is Devankar Mukhi. I'm one of the conference co-chairs for the upcoming Rotary Peace in the Streets conference happening this Friday, October 25th, and Saturday, October 26th. On Friday, we are here at the Wayne State University Student Center Ballroom, which is the building right next door, the second floor, and we're running from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And it's going to be highlighting a keynote speech from Samantha Fuentes. Samantha Fuentes is a Parkland High School shooting survivor student activist. She survived the Parkland High School shooting that happened in Florida about 2 years ago now, which is one of the largest school shootings that's ever happened in this country. And she's going to be talking about some of her activism, her nonprofit work, and how she wants to impact the world in a positive way from such a tragedy. And then on Saturday, we're going to be out in University of Windsor at the Windsor Law School, where we're going to have Indrani do a keynote, and then we're going to have Dr. Sakina Yacobi, who is the founder of the Afghan Institute of Learning. The Afghan Institute of Learning is a nonprofit in Afghanistan for girls, for women, to educate them, and every year they educate about 28 to 30,000 girls. So it's going to be a very great conference lineup, and we're inviting anyone in the community to come out. And if you're a student, you're allowed to come out for a discounted rate of $15. We're letting general adults and general admission $25.
And you can go to these flyers in front of you, RotaryPeaceInTheStreets.com, and then Indrani is getting an award on Sunday at the Arab American National Museum. It just happened to work out this way. We have 3 community and 3 global ones. Samantha Fuentes will get an award, Dr. Sakina Jacobi will get an award, and Indrani will get our Global Peacemaker Awards that have gone to people like Dr. Izzaldine Aboulesh last year, Jody Williams, the Nobel work, and so a lot of really, Howard Zen, a lot of people in the past have gotten these awards. That Sunday, you can go to Rotary Peace in the Streets. That is free, but you need to go today and register because we have food and stuff that we're ordering. That Sunday, it runs 10 to 2, and Indrani will be there, Dr. Jacobi will be there, and also Naja Bazi, who has started Zaman International, Reverend Faith Fowler, who does Cass Corridor. All dynamic, powerful women, both on the local and global level, who are doing great things. So we hope to see you out. There will be halal lunch with vegetarian options. If you've never been to the Arab American National Museum, it's a glorious place as a
Yes.
whole. So these flyers are
So
there.
These flyers are over here, so come out over here, and everybody should have a flyer of this. So visit RotaryPeaceInTheStreets.org for all your information. We hope to see you at our Peace Weekend.
And also, just to let you know, on the Peacemaker Award, 10 to 11:30, there's a complimentary tour of the museum. So if you haven't had a chance,
10 to 11.
10 to 11.
Yeah,
my
and you're
mistake.
free to go on your own. It's not, there's nobody guiding you. It's a self-guided tour. You can go and stuff like that, and Indrani should be there as well. And Gaurav from Valiant Media, who put together our website and put together these beautiful flyers, which she loved, by the way, Gaurav. I'll take the time to honor and thank him because we couldn't have did it without him as a whole. So a couple of questions. We do got to go to Michigan State really quickly, but I know there was a few questions.
Question over here.
Yes.
No, I was piggybacking off what the gentleman said as far as how the, referring to the greatest story ever told in the Christian religion, referring to Eve and the snake. And that story, it kind of like may use the woman as the scapegoat, as the fall of humanity. And so, like, but that story, I think each and everybody in this room have read or heard that story. But when you talk about Mami Wata and those stories, and those tales, you don't hear too much about them. So why are those not advertised as much as the other ones?
Race, my man.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think what's interesting too when you go to the Christian story is that the snake and the tree represent knowledge. And so that knowledge that's being referenced may well be the ancient knowledge that was part of the Mami Wata system, whatever forms it takes. But definitely there is a strong correlation between those two.
And to piggyback on that, there was black prophetesses, prophecies that were called the Sibyls, which we're learning more and more about. They were throughout North Africa and in Carthage, throughout the Greek islands and in Greece, and they were really big, and they were taken as far as Iran and all the way to India. Not all black. There were some brown and probably some white women too, but the vast majority of them were black. And they were painted throughout Southern Europe, and they were covered up and turned white by the Greeks. Those are facts. You can look that up, more of that. So that's a other story. So you can see this intentional removal of history to take black and brown people out of history.
And to take the female form.
And the female, of
gets
course. I keep forgetting about the female. Yeah, the female.
Yeah.
Which is why I wanted to do this film, which is why Indrani wants to do this film, which is why Wando Achebe. I hope we can start doing this. There has been a little bit of a shift. Netflix has just signed something to do a story, an animation story of black girl superheroes that are African based. So there is a shift going on. We hope to be a part of that. What many are calling an African Renaissance. I think it's time. And the thing is it isn't just about black and white or male and female. We all deserve to hear these stories, And Mami Wata is fascinating. I mean, and she's beautiful. We haven't had time to show the images and things like that, but I mean, and it's not just Mami Wata. It's Oshun, it's Yamaya, it's Oya, all these different gods around the world.
And just to add to that, the idea is not that they represent something external from us, but that these are perhaps parts of our collective understanding of the world that go back through millennia, that the feminine side, the side that represents that attachment, awareness of nature, that each of us can benefit from developing within ourselves as well.
Yeah, a lot of you probably really like the beach. A lot of you probably really like water. In African conceptions, when they did Ifa or divination, they would find that who you are overlaps. 80 to 90% of our bodies are made up of water. 80 to 90% of the world is made up of water. We're all born in water. Every living thing. Dr. Pearson's wife, Mavi, she always tells me, every living thing on life needs water to survive. So maybe by building up Mami Wata, maybe we are a little more conscious, not just about gender justice, but about preserving and taking care of our water and as a whole, because we are on an absolute path for destruction. And the fact that we can speak to environmental justice and racial and gender justice by reconstructing these stories that are ancient and old and maybe open it up to new people is exciting. And hopefully it works out, and hopefully it's a successful film. I mean, we certainly hope so. So anyone with millions of dollars, send me an email. We're looking for some funding as well. Let's give Indrani a really, really good. Yes, we'll take one more question.
Behind you.
Oh, hi you. Sorry.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question in terms of, for like women of color, but especially women of color who want to write fantasy. The majority of fantasy writers tend to be just white male. So I just wanted to know what your advice was for, I'm a fantasy writer, and what your advice was in harnessing like those old stories from our countries that have been erased, and how you start that up into sort of like this, bringing that into like a Western storytelling format.
She asked the story as a woman of color in a venue that tends to be dominated by male whites writing fantasy. Some advice from Indrani on how to do that.
So working in an industry like that, working in film where less than 7% of films are by anyone that's not a white man, you have a tremendous advantage. And that advantage is you have access to all kinds of points of view that are not commonly shared. So access that, go deep within the ideas that you want to explore, and don't try to fit into the prevailing model of what exists right now. I see a lot of women filmmakers who try to do the same thing that the male filmmakers are doing, or women of color that try to do a white narrative. And I would say let your diversity shine, let your perspective shine, because that's what the world needs right now. And at the end of the day, we're in a capitalist society, so what consumers want ultimately comes through.
Very good. Let's give her another round of applause. We're gonna have to get this busy woman back again here in Detroit sometime. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Why is it?
Laura, this is yours. This is you. So, hey Johnny, this is Gora. This is Johnny. He's gonna come with us. I love him on Sunday. We'll have you. We'll talk more.